Ever since I was 5 years old, all I'd ever wanted to be was the artist on the Spider-Man comics. Here's how that actually happened. This is a bit longer than a minute, fair warning, but it's totally worth it if you like happy endings. I grew up on this cartoon in the 70s. It was the best. One day my mom let me buy a compilation of the comic from the drugstore. I immediately began copying Steve Ditko's art. I was hooked. This started me working on a path for the next 25 years, trying to improve my drawing so I could one day work for Marvel Comics as the artist on Spider-Man. When I was 15, I began attending comic conventions, waiting in line for portfolio reviews, then getting told to keep at it, kid, and go home miserable and dejected. I finished high school, then college. I got a day job working in video games, but every night I would come home and practice. I would prepare for the next comic convention. I got married, we moved to Los Angeles. I worked at Malibu Comics doing the covers for Star Trek and Mortal Kombat. But it wasn't the same. All I wanted to do was Spider-Man. I became an animator, working on Casper, Power Rangers, and more, but every night I was dedicated to my dream of being the artist on Spider-Man. In 1998, I met two comic legends, Marv Wolfman and Len Wein. I reminded them that in the 70s they wrote a Spider-Man novel called Mayhem in Manhattan and asked them if I could adapt it into a graphic novel. They had no problem with this and agreed to help me pursue my dream of getting the gig at Marvel Comics. For the next 2 years, I worked on submissions and got rejected, even with their help. Finally, Marv, seeing that I was sad because my dream was dying, said, "Why don't you take your day job in animation and apply it to comics?" I didn't really think of this because, to me, animation was just my day job. It wasn't art in the traditional way that I had thought of it. But I was desperate, so I tried it, and Marv submitted it that year at San Diego Comic-Con. A few months later, I got the call. Axel Alonso, Spider-Man's editor from Marvel Comics, called me and said, "I love this. Let's get you on your own series." I was in shock. When I could finally speak, I said, "I waited 32 years for this call." I flew out to New York and met with him, Joe Quesada, and Bill Jamis. We talked about animation and comics, and then they sent me home with 10 months to finish my run of 4 issues of the comic. For the next 10 months, I worked, ate, drank, and slept Spider-Man. It was my dream job. I put everything into it. The technology 20 years ago just wasn't ready for what my heart and mind wanted, but I didn't care. I pushed it to the limit. In the end, I finished the series, and it was released the week of the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie. I did comic book store signings, interviews, everything. I remember Marv telling me, "You're officially a Spider-Man artist, Scott. No one can ever take that away from you." And he was right. Next year will be 20 years since my 4-issue run on Spider-Man came out, and I still smile every time I think about it.